Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into a question that has drifted through stories, through science, and through quiet moments of wonder. Could time travelers be living among us? But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our journey into time together. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here quietly, unfolding the story. For a moment, imagine a simple scene. A cup of tea rests beside you. At first it is warm, almost comforting to the touch, but slowly, without asking, without announcing itself, the warmth begins to fade. The steam grows thinner, the surface stills. Minutes pass, and what was once hot becomes something else entirely. You never see time itself, you never catch it moving, and yet, something has clearly changed. This is where our journey begins, not with clocks or equations or distant galaxies, but with something much quieter. The realization that time does not appear to us directly. It does not glow or hum or leave a visible trail. Instead, it hides inside change, in the cooling of tea, in the lengthening of shadows, in the soft rhythm between heartbeats. You might have grown up thinking of time as something like a river, always flowing forward, carrying everything along with it. Or perhaps like the ticking of a clock, steady and precise, marking out the seconds one by one. These are useful images, comforting ones even. But they are not quite the full story. Because in science, time is a little stranger than that. It does not simply flow on its own like water slipping downhill. Instead, it reveals itself only when something happens, when something shifts, when something moves from one state into another. Without change, there would be no way to notice time at all. A perfectly still universe, frozen in every detail, would have no sense of before or after, no passage, no unfolding. Time, in this sense, is not just a background stage where events play out. It is woven into the events themselves. It is not separate from the world. It is part of how the world transforms. And this is where a quiet question begins to form. If time is not as simple as it seems, if it is not just a steady ticking that moves the same for everyone, then what does that mean for the idea of travelling through it? Because when we hear the phrase time traveller, why, we often picture something dramatic, a machine, a flash of light, someone stepping out of nowhere, carrying knowledge from another era. But science, as it turns out, paints a much softer and perhaps more intriguing picture. It suggests that time does not behave the same way for everyone, that under certain conditions it can stretch, it can slow, it can even drift apart so that two people, starting together, may not arrive at the same moment in quite the same way. And if that is true, then the idea of a time traveller becomes less like fiction and more like a subtle consequence of how reality works. But before we move too quickly into those deeper waters, it helps to pause here, in this quiet beginning, and notice something even closer, your own experience of time. Think about how a single minute can feel different depending on where you are. Waiting for something can make time feel stretched, almost thin, like it's reluctant to move. But when you're absorbed in a conversation, or a thought, or even a dream, that same minute can slip by unnoticed as if it barely existed at all. The clock does not change, and yet your experience does. This gentle mismatch is not an illusion in the sense of being false. It is a clue, a hint that time, as you live it, is not just something happening out there in the universe, but something shaped, at least in part, by how you perceive it. So already, even before we reach the edges of physics, time begins to loosen. It becomes less rigid, less absolute, more like something that can bend, not wildly, not chaotically, but quietly, in ways that are easy to overlook. And as we move forward, we'll begin to see that this bending is not just in the mind. It is written into the structure of the universe itself. We'll explore how motion can gently slow the passage of time, how gravity can deepen it, like a weight pressing down on a soft fabric, how light, travelling across vast distances, carries with it echoes of the past, and how the brain, in its quiet work, stitches together moments into something we call now. And somewhere along that path, we will return to our original question. Not with urgency, but with patience. Could someone, somewhere, have moved through time in a way that leaves them here, among us? For now there is no need to answer. Just let the question rest beside you, like that cooling cup of tea. Let it settle into the background, soft and unhurried. Because understanding time is not something that happens all at once. It unfolds slowly, gently, one idea at a time. And in that unfolding, something interesting begins to happen. Time itself starts to feel a little less certain and a little more alive. If you stay with that quiet image for just a moment longer, the cup of tea slowly cooling, the warmth fading without ever announcing its departure, you begin to notice something subtle, almost easy to miss. Nothing called time ever appeared. There was no visible flow, no drifting substance, no gentle stream passing by your fingertips, and yet something unmistakable unfolded. The tea changed, the air shifted, the moment moved on, and so we arrive at a simple but quietly powerful idea. Time is not something you see, it is something you infer. You notice it only because things do not stay the same. Imagine for a moment a world where nothing changes, no motion, no light flickering, no sound rising or falling, every particle fixed, every detail perfectly still. In such a world, there would be no before and after, no sense of waiting, no memory forming, because nothing would ever differ from what came before. It would not feel like time had stopped. It would feel like time had never existed at all. This is why, in science, time is often understood not as a thing on its own, but as something deeply tied to change. It is a way of describing how the universe transforms from one state into another. Not a separate ingredient, but part of the process itself. You might think of it like the pages of a book. When you read, you move from one page to the next, and the story unfolds. But the story is not something floating outside the pages. It exists because of the sequence, because of the progression, because each moment leads gently into the next. Without that unfolding, there is no story, and without change, there is no time. This way of thinking can feel a little unusual at first, because we are so used to imagining time as something steady and independent, something that continues on, whether we pay attention to it or not. But when you look closely, it becomes harder to separate time from the changes it measures. Take something as ordinary as a shadow on a wall. In the morning it stretches long and thin across the floor. As the day passes, it slowly shifts, drawing inward, rotating gently as the sun moves across the sky. By evening it has changed shape entirely, fading into the dimness of dusk. What you're really watching is not time moving. You're watching light change its angle. You're watching the earth turn. You're watching a relationship between objects slowly evolve. And from that evolution, your mind constructs a sense of passing time. Or consider something even quieter. A loaf of bread in an oven. At first, it is soft, pale and unformed. But as heat surrounds it, the surface begins to darken, the texture changes, the aroma fills the room. If you return a few minutes later, it is no longer what it was. It has become something new. Again, time has not appeared as a visible force. It has revealed itself through transformation. And this leads us to a gentle but important shift in perspective. Time is not just a backdrop where events happen. It is something that becomes meaningful only when events unfold. It is not a stage waiting in the dark. It is more like the slow dance of everything that exists, each step flowing into the next, each movement shaping what comes after. In this sense, time begins to feel less like a rigid line and more like a pattern, an ongoing arrangement of changes that we learn to recognize. And perhaps this is why your experience of time can feel so different from moment to moment. Because what you are really sensing is not time itself, but the density and rhythm of change. When you are waiting, perhaps watching the seconds pass on a clock, the changes feel sparse. Each moment stretches thin and drawn out, as if reluctant to move forward. But when you are engaged, reading, listening, thinking, many small changes happen at once. Thoughts shift, images form, ideas connect, and in that richness, time seems to pass more quickly, not because time has sped up, but because change has become more full. This idea becomes even more interesting when we gently turn back toward physics, because the universe, at its deepest level, does not describe time as something flowing in a simple, uniform way. Instead, it describes relationships, movements, transformations between states, the positions of particles, the exchange of energy, the shifting geometry of space itself. And within all of that, time is woven quietly into the fabric of what changes. There is no universal clock sitting outside the universe ticking away independently. No hidden metronome keeping perfect rhythm for everything that exists. Instead, each process carries its own sense of duration, its own unfolding, its own pace. And that opens the door to something rather surprising. If time is tied to change, and change can occur at different rates, then perhaps time itself is not as uniform as it seems. Perhaps it can stretch or compress, depending on how the universe is moving or how it is shaped. Perhaps two observers experiencing different kinds of change might not agree on how much time has passed. This is not yet the full story. It is only the beginning of a deeper realization, one that will slowly unfold as we continue. But already something has shifted. Time is no longer a simple line moving forward. It is something more subtle, more relational, more dependent on the way things change and interact. And as this idea settles in, you might begin to notice your surroundings a little differently. The soft rise and fall of your breath, the faint hum of a fan in the background, the quiet rhythm of your thoughts, appearing and fading one after another. Each of these is a small change, and together they create the gentle sense that time is passing. Not because time itself is moving, but because the world and everything within it is quietly becoming something new. If you rest for a moment with that idea that time reveals itself through change, you may begin to notice something even more subtle, something closer, something almost hidden inside your own experience. The present moment, the now you feel so clearly, may not be as simple as it seems. We often imagine the present as a sharp point, a precise instant, infinitely thin, dividing the past from the future, like the edge of a blade, cutting cleanly between what has already happened and what is yet to come. But your experience of now does not feel like a thin line. It feels softer than that. It has a kind of width, a gentle duration, a small window of time where things seem to belong together, even if they do not arrive at exactly the same moment. Imagine watching someone clap their hands. Light from the movement reaches your eyes almost instantly. The sound, however, travels more slowly. It takes a little longer to arrive, and yet, when you watch and listen, you do not experience two separate events. You do not see the hands meet, and then, a moment later, hear the sound as something disconnected. Instead, your mind blends them. It stitches them together into a single, unified experience. A clap. This quiet stitching is happening all the time. The world does not arrive to you in perfect synchrony. Light, sound, touch, all travel at different speeds. Even within your body, signals take time to move. A sensation in your foot takes longer to reach your brain than a sensation in your hand. And yet, your experience feels seamless, continuous, whole. This is because your brain is not simply receiving time, it is assembling it. There is a small window, just a few seconds long, where incoming information is gathered, adjusted, and gently aligned. Within this window, events that are slightly out of sync are brought together, like instruments in an orchestra tuning themselves to a shared rhythm. This window is sometimes called the specious present. Though you do not need to remember the name, what matters is the idea. The present is not a single instant. It is a short, living span of time shaped by the brain into something that feels immediate and real. You can notice this in simple ways. Think about listening to a sentence. The meaning does not exist in a single word. It emerges across several seconds as each word connects to the next. If your sense of now were truly a point, infinitely small, you would never understand a sentence. You would only ever hear isolated sounds, disconnected from one another, but instead your mind holds on to what just happened, blends it with what is happening now, and allows meaning to unfold. The present, then, is not a knife's edge. It is more like a soft ripple, carrying a few moments together as one, and this ripple can change. For different creatures, the width of this present moment may not be the same. A small insect reacting quickly to its environment may experience a faster, more finely divided stream of moments. To it, the world might feel slightly slowed down, each movement easier to track. Larger animals with slower processing may experience a broader, smoother flow. Even within your own life, this window can shift. When you're tired or drifting toward sleep, the present can feel stretched and hazy. Moments blur together, edges soften, and time becomes less precise. When you are alert, focused, engaged, the present can feel sharper, more detailed, more finely divided. Again, the clock does not change, but your experience of now does, and this leads to a gentle realization. The present is not something the universe gives you fully formed. It is something your mind creates, a carefully constructed slice of reality, wide enough to hold meaning, narrow enough to feel immediate. This does not mean that time itself is an illusion in the sense of being false or unreal. Rather, it suggests that what you experience as time is a collaboration, a meeting point between the external world and the internal processes of your brain. The universe provides events, changes, signals. Your mind weaves them into a story, and that story is what you call now. If you let this idea settle for a moment, it begins to shift something quietly. Because if the present is not a precise universal instant, if it is something constructed, something shaped, then perhaps different observers might not share the same now at all. Perhaps what feels immediate to you is already part of the past for someone else, or still part of the future. This is not yet a conclusion, only a hint, a gentle opening toward a deeper idea we will explore soon. That time, even beyond the mind, may not be the same for everyone. But for now, it is enough to rest with this. The present moment is not a single point. It is a small living window, a soft gathering of change held together just long enough for you to experience it as one. And as you sit here, or lie here, listening quietly, you can begin to notice that window in your own awareness. The way one thought fades as another takes its place. The way a sound lingers just long enough to blend into silence. The way each breath overlaps gently with the next. This is your present, not a razor-thin instant, but a quiet span of becoming. And within it, time does not feel like something rushing forward. It feels like something unfolding, slowly, softly, and just enough for you to follow. As that soft sense of the present begins to settle in, that feeling of a small window where moments gather and gently overlap, you may begin to notice something even more personal. That window is not something you passively receive. It is something your brain quietly builds. At every instant, signals are arriving from all around you. Light reflects off surfaces and enters your eyes. Sound waves ripple through the air and reach your ears. Subtle pressures touch your skin. Tiny changes in temperature, in balance, in position. All of these are constantly being detected, translated, and sent inward as streams of information. But none of these signals arrive at the same time. Light moves incredibly fast, reaching you almost instantly across everyday distances. Sound, by comparison, travels much more slowly, taking a small but noticeable fraction of a second to catch up. And within your own body, the signals from different parts take different amounts of time to reach your brain. A sensation from your toes travels farther than one from your hands, and so it arrives just a little later. If your experience reflected these differences directly, the world would feel fragmented. You would see lips move, and only later hear the voice. You would feel your foot touch the ground, slightly after it actually happened. Every moment would be scattered into tiny pieces, out of sync, never quite aligning. But that is not how the world feels. Instead, everything arrives together, smooth and unified, as if perfectly coordinated. This is because your brain does not simply receive time, it edits it. Very gently, very quietly, it delays certain signals, aligns others, and blends them into a single coherent experience. It creates the illusion of simultaneity, even when the underlying events are slightly out of step. You might think of it like watching a carefully edited film. When a movie is created, scenes are not always filmed in order. Sounds are often recorded separately from images. Music is added later. But when everything is assembled, you do not see the pieces. You see a seamless story. Your brain is doing something similar. It takes the raw fragments of reality and arranges them into a flowing narrative, one that feels continuous and real. And this process happens so naturally, so effortlessly, that you rarely notice it at all. Consider something simple, like a video call. If the connection is slightly delayed, you might notice the person's lips moving just a fraction before you hear their voice. It feels strange, slightly unsettling, because the natural alignment you expect has been disrupted. The brain's usual smoothing process is no longer able to fully compensate. That small discomfort is a clue. It reveals that your normal experience of time is not perfectly synchronized by the world itself, but carefully stabilized by your mind. And this stabilization is not just about aligning signals, it is also about creating continuity. Your brain does not treat each moment as separate and isolated. Instead, it overlaps them, allowing the recent past to blend gently into the present. This is why you can follow a melody, understand a sentence, or recognize a familiar face even as it moves. The present, as you experience it, is always slightly extended, a soft overlap of what has just happened and what is happening now. Without this overlap, experience would feel disjointed, like a series of disconnected snapshots. But with it, everything flows. This flow is what gives time its texture, and yet there is something even more interesting. Because the brain does not only assemble the present, it also uses the past to anticipate the future. As you move through the world, your brain is constantly making quiet predictions. It expects patterns to continue, movements to follow certain paths, sounds to match familiar rhythms. When these expectations are met, everything feels smooth and natural. When they are not, you notice a small disruption, a surprise, a moment of adjustment. This predictive process helps your brain stay ahead of the incoming signals, reducing the feeling of delay and making your experience feel immediate. In a way, your sense of now is always slightly ahead of reality, gently leaning into what is about to happen while still holding on to what has just occurred. It is a delicate balance, a quiet blending of past, present, and near future. And this blending gives rise to a fascinating possibility. If your experience of time depends on how your brain assembles and interprets signals, then time, as you feel it, is not a fixed property of the universe. It is something shaped by perception. This does not mean that the external world lacks structure or order. The physical processes of the universe continue, whether you observe them or not. But your experience of those processes, the way they unfold into a sense of time, is deeply connected to how your mind organizes them. And that means that different minds, under different conditions, might experience time differently. A moment of fear can feel stretched, as if each second expands. A moment of joy can pass quickly, almost slipping away before you can hold on to it. In dreams, entire sequences of events can unfold in what seems like a brief instant. The clock may remain steady, but your inner sense of time shifts and bends. And so, even here, within the quiet workings of the brain, we begin to see a pattern emerging. Time is not as rigid as it appears. It is not a single uniform stream carrying everything forward in perfect synchrony. Instead, it is something more flexible, something that can be shaped subtly, gently, by the processes that give rise to experience itself. And as this idea begins to settle, it prepares us for a deeper realization still. Because if time can feel different depending on how it is perceived, then perhaps, beyond perception, it can also behave differently depending on how the universe itself is moving. For now, you can simply rest with this thought, that the present moment you experience is not given to you whole. It is carefully assembled, softly stitched together, and gently smoothed into something that feels continuous. A quiet construction, a living moment, and within it, time is not something you pass through. It is something your mind helps bring into being. As you rest with this idea, that your present moment is something your brain carefully assembles, it becomes natural to wonder about something just behind it, the past. It can feel so solid, so certain, a place you've already been, a sequence of moments stored somewhere inside you, waiting to be revisited whenever you choose. But when you look a little more closely, the past begins to soften, because memory is not what it first appears to be. It is not a recording. It is not a perfect archive of everything that has ever happened to you, stored frame by frame, waiting to be replayed exactly as it was. Instead, memory is something more active, more creative, more alive. Each time you remember something, you're not simply retrieving it, you're rebuilding it. Imagine for a moment a photograph that slowly changes each time you look at it. The colours shift slightly, the details blur and sharpen in different places. Certain elements stand out more clearly, while others fade quietly into the background. You would still recognise the image, You would still say, yes, this is the same moment, but it would not be identical each time. This is closer to how memory works. When you recall a moment, perhaps a conversation, a place, a feeling, your brain gathers pieces of information from different regions, visual impressions, sounds, emotions, fragments of meaning. It weaves them together into a coherent scene. But this reconstruction is influenced by your current state, how you feel now, what you expect, what you have learned since then, and so the memory shifts, just a little, each time. This may sound unsettling at first, but it carries a quiet kind of beauty, because it means your past is not frozen. It is gently evolving alongside you, and there is something even more interesting. The same systems in your brain that allow you to remember the past are also used to imagine the future. When you think ahead, planning a conversation, imagining a journey, picturing something that has not yet happened, you're drawing on the same building blocks. You're assembling scenes, combining elements, creating possibilities. In this sense, remembering and imagining are closely linked. Both are forms of what we might softly call mental time travel. You move backward, reconstructing what has been. You move forward, constructing what could be. And in both directions, the process feels natural, almost effortless. This suggests something quite profound. Your sense of time, past, present, and future, is not something you simply observe. It is something your mind actively creates. The past is rebuilt, the present is assembled, the future is imagined, and all three are woven together into a continuous story that feels stable and real. But underneath that story, there is constant motion, constant reconstruction. Consider a simple example. You think about a place you visited years ago, perhaps a street, a room, a quiet afternoon. As the image forms in your mind, it feels familiar. You recognize it. You trust it. But the version you are seeing now is shaped not only by what happened then, but by everything that has happened since. The emotions you attach to it may have softened or deepened. Certain details may have become more vivid, while others have quietly disappeared. The memory feels like the past, but it is also a reflection of the present. And this blending has an important role, because it helps anchor you in time. Without memory, there would be no sense of continuity. Each moment would stand alone, disconnected from what came before. You would not experience a flowing timeline, but a series of isolated fragments. Memory gives those fragments a shape. It allows you to feel that you have come from somewhere, and that you are moving towards something. It creates a sense of direction, and this direction connects in a subtle way to something we will explore more deeply soon. The idea that time itself seems to move in one direction, from past to future, not because it must, but because of how change unfolds and how memory captures that unfolding. You remember the tea when it was hot. You do not remember it becoming hotter on its own. You remember the glass before it shattered. You do not remember the shards leaping back together. This asymmetry, this one-way sense of time, is tied closely to memory. Because memory stores traces of what has already happened, not what has yet to occur. It builds a map of the past, but leaves the future open. And so your experience of time naturally aligns with this direction. You feel yourself moving forward, even though, as we will later discover, the deeper structure of the universe may not be quite so simple. For now, though, there is no need to reach that far. It is enough to notice how gently your sense of time is shaped by memory, how the past is not a fixed place, but a living reconstruction, how the future is not a distant destination, but a quiet extension of the same process, and how the present sits between them, softly blending what has been with what is becoming. As you lie here, or sit quietly, you might notice small memories drifting in and out of awareness. A recent moment, a distant one, something clear, something vague, each one appearing, forming, and fading, not as a perfect recording, but as a gentle recreation. And within that process, time feels less like a rigid path and more like a story, one that is being written, revised, and quietly understood moment by moment. As memory quietly rebuilds the past, moment by moment, and imagination gently sketches the future, there are times, rare, fleeting times, when something unusual happens. A moment feels familiar, not in the ordinary way, like recognizing a place you've been before, or recalling a conversation you remember clearly. This is different. It arrives suddenly, without warning, and carries a strange certainty. You are here, and yet it feels as though you have already been here before. The same words, the same movements, the same unfolding of events, as if the present moment is echoing something that has already happened. This experience has a name, though the name itself is less important than the feeling. Deja vu. A quiet disturbance in the smooth flow of time. It can be subtle, a passing flicker that fades almost as soon as it appears. Or it can linger for a few seconds, long enough for you to notice it clearly, perhaps even pause and wonder, how could this be? Have I really lived this moment before? For centuries, experiences like this have inspired all kinds of interpretations. Some have imagined it as a glimpse into a previous life, others as a sign of parallel realities brushing gently against one another. And in the context of time travel, it can feel like a hint, just a hint, that time might not be as straightforward as it seems. But when we turn to science, the explanation, while less dramatic, is no less fascinating. It suggests that deja vu is not a window into another timeline, but a small misalignment within the brain itself. A brief, harmless glitch in how memory and perception are coordinated. To understand this, it helps to return to what we've already seen. Your brain is constantly assembling the present, stitching together signals that arrive at slightly different times. It is also continuously comparing what you're experiencing now with what you have experienced before, searching for patterns, familiarities, and meaning. Most of the time, this process works seamlessly, but occasionally something slips. Imagine that a current experience, a scene, a sound, a combination of details, is processed in a way that makes it feel familiar before it has actually been stored as a memory. The brain, detecting this sense of familiarity, briefly interprets the present as something that belongs to the past, not because it truly happened before, but because the signal that marks it as familiar has arrived just a fraction too early. It is as if two internal processes, perception and memory, have fallen slightly out of step, like two musicians drifting just a beat apart. And in that small gap, the present moment feels like an echo. There are other possibilities as well, each gentle, each grounded in the workings of the mind. Sometimes, a situation may resemble something you've experienced before, not exactly, but closely enough that your brain recognizes the pattern without consciously identifying the source. The familiarity is real, but its origin is hidden, giving the impression that the entire moment has been lived already. At other times, the feeling may arise from the way your brain predicts what will happen next. As we explored earlier, your mind is constantly anticipating the future, using past experience to shape expectations. If those predictions align very closely with what actually unfolds, the result can feel strangely like recollection rather than anticipation. And then there are dreams. You may have had the experience of dreaming something vague, something incomplete, only to encounter a similar scene later in waking life. The connection may not be exact, but it can feel close enough to trigger that same quiet sense of having been here before. Again, not because time has looped or repeated, but because fragments of memory, perception, and expectation have briefly overlapped in an unusual way. What is important in all of these explanations is that they do not require time itself to behave differently. They arise from the way the brain organizes experience, and yet, even knowing this, the feeling of deja vu retains a certain softness, a certain mystery. It reminds us gently that our experience of time is not perfectly precise, that there are small imperfections, small shifts where the boundaries between past and present become less clear, and in those moments, time feels less like a straight line, and more like something that can ripple or echo or fold slightly in on itself. It is tempting perhaps to read more into these moments, to imagine that they are hints of something deeper, something beyond our current understanding. And while science remains cautious, grounded in evidence, it also leaves space for curiosity, because the truth is, even without invoking time travel, the experience of time is already more subtle than it first appears. The brain builds the present, it reconstructs the past, it anticipates the future. And sometimes, just sometimes, those processes overlap in ways that feel unusual. A moment repeats, not in reality, but in perception. A flicker of familiarity passes through you, and then fades, leaving behind only a quiet question. What just happened? As you rest with that question, there is no need to answer it fully. It's enough to notice how delicate your sense of time really is, how it depends on the careful coordination of countless small processes, each one working silently beneath your awareness, and how, when that coordination shifts, even slightly, the experience of time can change, not dramatically, not in a way that breaks the world, but just enough to remind you that time, as you feel it, is not a fixed path. It is a construction, a gentle, ongoing creation. And from here, as we begin to turn outward again, away from the inner workings of the mind and toward the wider universe, we will discover something unexpected. That this flexibility, this quiet bending of time, is not only in the brain, it is written into the cosmos itself. As your awareness gently shifts outward, from the quiet workings of the mind to the wider world around you, you may begin to notice something unexpected. Time, which once felt like a single steady flow, begins to separate into many rhythms, not one clock, but many, each keeping its own pace, its own quiet measure of change. Here on Earth, your sense of time is often guided by familiar cycles, the rising and setting of the sun, the gradual transition from morning to evening, the rhythm of sleep and wakefulness that moves through your body each day. There is a small region deep within your brain, softly responding to light, helping to regulate this daily cycle. It adjusts your alertness, your energy, even the subtle timing of your thoughts. When light fades, your body begins to prepare for rest. When it returns, you gently awaken. This is your internal clock, not ticking like a machine, but adapting, responding, staying in quiet conversation with the world around you. And yet, even here, time is already not entirely uniform. If you travel across time zones, your body does not instantly adjust. For a while, your internal rhythm continues at its own pace, slightly out of sync with the new day around you. Morning may feel like night. Evening may feel like early afternoon. Two clocks, both real, gently disagreeing. And as we lift our view upward, beyond the surface of the Earth, this quiet diversity becomes even more striking. High above you, circling the planet, are satellites, small silent machines that help guide navigation systems across the world. They carry extremely precise clocks, far more accurate than any ordinary watch. These clocks must remain in careful alignment with those on the ground. But they do not naturally, because the conditions they move through are different. They are travelling quickly, orbiting the Earth at high speed, and they are farther from the planet's surface, where the pull of gravity is slightly weaker. These differences, subtle as they may seem, are enough to affect how time passes for them. If left uncorrected, their clocks would slowly drift out of sync with those on Earth. Not by much at first, but enough that, over time, navigation systems would begin to make errors, distances would shift, locations would blur, what once seemed precise would become unreliable. And so, adjustments are made. Careful, constant corrections, accounting for the fact that time does not pass in exactly the same way for these satellites as it does for you. This is not speculation. It is something we rely on quietly, every day, and it reveals something profound. Time is not universal. It does not move in perfect unison across all places and conditions. Instead, it depends, gently but unmistakably, on motion and gravity. We will explore those ideas more deeply soon, but even now, without equations, without complexity, you can begin to feel the shape of it. Different conditions, different changes, different times, and as we continue outward, far beyond the orbit of satellites, we find even more remarkable clocks. In the vast distances between stars, there are objects known as pulsars. They are the remnants of massive stars collapsed into incredibly dense forms, spinning rapidly in space. As they rotate, they emit beams of radiation that sweep across the cosmos like the steady beam of a lighthouse. Each rotation produces a pulse, and these pulses arrive with astonishing regularity. So regular, in fact, that they rival the precision of our most advanced clocks. Some pulses spin hundreds of times each second, sending out signals that can be measured with incredible accuracy. Across thousands of light years, their rhythm remains steady, a cosmic heartbeat. And yet, even these clocks are not entirely separate from the story we are telling, because the signals they send take time to reach us. When you detect a pulsar's pulse, you're not observing it as it is now. You're observing it as it was, perhaps years ago, perhaps centuries, perhaps much longer. Which means that even these precise cosmic clocks are intertwined with something deeper. Light, every signal, every pulse, every image you receive from the distant universe travels at a finite speed. Not instant, not immediate, but fast. So fast it feels instantaneous at human scales, yet still limited across cosmic distances. And because of that limit, the universe reveals itself to you with a gentle delay. You never see things as they are right now. You see them as they were, carried to you across space. The moon, as it was just over a second ago. The sun, as it was several minutes ago. The stars as they were years, centuries, or even millions of years in the past. In this sense, the sky above you is not just a view of distant places, it is a layered collection of different times, each point of light a message from another moment, and so as you rest beneath it, or imagine it softly above you, something begins to shift. Time is no longer a single thread running through everything, it is a tapestry, woven from many strands, each one moving at its own pace, each one shaped by its own conditions. Your body keeps one rhythm, the earth another. Satellites above you adjust theirs. Distant stars and pulsars carry yet another. And light, quietly travelling between them all, brings these different times together into a single experience, but only from your perspective, only here. And as this idea settles, gently expanding your sense of the world, it opens the door to something even more surprising. If different parts of the universe keep different times, if clocks can drift even slightly depending on where they are and how they move, then perhaps the idea of a single shared now begins to fade, not abruptly, not completely, but softly, like the light of evening giving way to night. As the idea of many clocks settles in, each keeping its own quiet rhythm, each unfolding at its own pace, you may begin to notice something that connects them all, something that moves between them, something that carries their stories. Light. It is easy to think of light as something simple, something that allows you to see, something that fills a room when a window is open or fades gently when evening arrives. But in a deeper sense, light is doing something far more profound. It is carrying time. Every beam of light you see has travelled, not instantly, not all at once, but across a distance, taking time to arrive. And because of that, everything you see is, in a quiet way, a memory. Imagine looking up at the moon. Its soft glow feels immediate, present, right there, above you. But the light reaching your eyes has been travelling for just over a second. What you're seeing is not the moon as it is in this exact instant, but the moon as it was a moment ago. A small delay, barely noticeable, but real. Now consider the sun. Its light takes several minutes to reach you. The warmth you feel on your skin, the brightness that fills the sky, is slightly out of date. If something were to change on the sun, something sudden and dramatic, you would not know it right away. There would be a quiet pause, a few minutes of unknowing before the news arrived. And beyond the sun, the distances grow vast. The nearest stars are so far away that their light takes years to reach us. When you see them shining in the night sky, you are seeing them as they were years ago. Some of the faint, distant galaxies you might glimpse through a telescope are so far away that their light began its journey millions, even billions of years in the past, long before you were here, long before the Earth looked the way it does now. And yet, their light is arriving now, softly, patiently, completing a journey that began long ago. In this way, the universe becomes a kind of layered history, not arranged in a single timeline, but spread out across space. Nearby objects show you the recent past. Distant objects reveal older chapters, and the farther you look, the deeper into the past you see. Light is not just illumination. It is a messenger, a quiet historian carrying information across space, preserving moments and delivering them gently into your awareness. But it does more than that. It also helps define how we measure and understand the universe. Because light travels at a constant speed, always the same no matter where you are or how you move, it becomes a kind of universal reference, a way of comparing distances, durations, and events. You do not need to think of this in terms of numbers or equations. It is enough to imagine light as something steady, reliable, always moving in the same way. And from that steadiness, we build our understanding of space and time. One of the simplest ways to picture this is through what is sometimes called a light clock. You can imagine two mirrors facing each other, with a beam of light bouncing back and forth between them. Each time the light travels from one mirror to the other and back again, it marks a single tick. If the distance between the mirrors remains the same, and the light always travels at the same speed, then each tick takes the same amount of time. Now imagine that this clock begins to move, not just gently but quickly across space. From the outside, the path of the light no longer looks straight up and down between the mirrors. Instead, it traces a diagonal path like a gentle zigzag because the mirrors are moving while the light travels. The distance the light must cover becomes longer. And since the light continues to move at the same steady speed, it takes more time to complete each tick. The clock slows down, not because anything inside it has changed, but because of how it is moving. This simple image, just light bouncing between mirrors, captures something essential about the nature of time. Time is not separate from motion, it is affected by it, and light, quietly, reveals that connection. But even without imagining mirrors or moving clocks, you can feel this idea in a softer way. Every time you see something, you're receiving light that has travelled. Every time you look around, you're seeing a version of the world that is slightly delayed. And across vast distances, that delay becomes a journey through history. The night sky, then, is not just a collection of distant lights. It is a tapestry of moments, each star, each galaxy, each faint glow representing a different point in time, all arriving together in your present, a present that, as we have begun to see, is not as simple as it once seemed. Because if light takes time to travel, what you see depends on where you are and how far away things are, then the idea of everything sharing the same now becomes harder to hold on to. Two observers, in different places, looking at different parts of the universe, may not agree on what is happening at this very moment. Not because one is wrong, but because this moment is not the same everywhere. It depends on distance, on light, on the time it takes for information to travel. And so, gently, almost without noticing, we arrive at a deeper insight. The present is not universal. It is shaped by perspective, by location, by the paths that light has taken to reach you. And as this realization settles, it prepares us for something even more surprising. Because once we accept that the present is not shared equally across space, it becomes possible to ask a new question. Not just how we perceive time, but how time itself behaves, depending on where you are and how you move through the universe. Time equals 2 seconds / greater than. As light quietly carries the past across space, and as each observer receives their own version of events, something begins to soften at the edges of a familiar idea. The idea of now. It feels so immediate, so certain. This moment, right here, right now, seems like something shared, something universal, as though, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, the same now is unfolding for everyone all at once. But when we follow the path of light a little further, that certainty begins to drift. Imagine for a moment a simple scene. You're standing on a quiet stretch of ground. Far in the distance, on opposite sides of you, 2 bolts of lightning strike, one to your left, one to your right. The sky flashes bright and sudden. From where you stand, the light from both strikes reaches you at the same time. The flashes appear simultaneous. To you, it feels clear. Both events happened at the same moment. Now imagine another observer. This person is moving, gliding smoothly past you, perhaps on a fast train. As they move, they are travelling toward one of the lightning strikes and away from the other. Because of this motion, the light from the strike they are moving toward reaches them slightly sooner, while the light from the other takes a little longer to arrive. To them, the 2 flashes are not simultaneous. One appears first, then the other, and here is the quiet but profound realization. Both observers are correct. There is no single, universal answer to the question. Did the lightning strikes happen at the same time? The answer depends on where you are and how you are moving. This idea is known in physics as the relativity of simultaneity, but you do not need the name. What matters is the feeling of it. That now is not absolute. It is not a single, shared slice of the universe that everyone experiences together. Instead, it is something that depends on perspective, on position, on motion, and this changes something fundamental. Because if different observers can disagree about whether 2 events happened at the same time, then the idea of a universal present, a single, global now that stretches across the entire universe, begins to dissolve. There is no cosmic clock ticking in perfect unison for everything that exists. No master moment that all of reality shares. Instead, each observer carries their own now, shaped by their path through space, by the light that reaches them, by the way they move. And these different nows do not always align. They overlap, they shift, they drift gently apart. You might think of it like standing in a wide landscape at dusk. Different parts of the horizon darken at slightly different times. The fading of light does not happen all at once. It moves subtly across the sky. And depending on where you look, the moment feels slightly different. There is no single edge of night, only a gradual transition experienced differently from each viewpoint. In a similar way, the present is not a sharp boundary across the universe. It is a collection of local experiences, each one valid, each one real, but not perfectly synchronized with the others. And this leads to a deeper, more surprising thought. If there is no universal now, then what does it mean to say that something is happening at this moment? From your perspective, it is clear. You feel the present directly, as we explored earlier, a soft window of awareness shaped by your mind. But beyond your immediate surroundings, the concept becomes less precise. Events far away do not share your present in any simple way. They belong to different slices of time, depending on how their light reaches you and how you're moving relative to them. This does not mean that reality is uncertain or chaotic. The laws of physics remain consistent. The relationships between events remain structured and predictable. But the way those events are grouped into a shared now is not fixed. It depends on the observer, and so, quietly, the idea of time begins to change once more. It becomes less like a universal river flowing through everything, and more like a landscape, where different paths move through different regions, each carrying its own sense of before and after. You, moving gently through your own path, experience one sequence of moments. Another observer, moving differently, experiences another. Neither is more correct. They are simply different ways of slicing the same underlying reality. And this realization brings us closer to the heart of our question. Because if time is not shared equally, if the present is not universal, then the possibility begins to emerge that time itself may behave differently depending on how you move, not just in how you perceive it, but in how it actually unfolds. This is where we begin to leave the familiar ground of everyday experience and step gently into the deeper structure of the universe, a place where motion itself can stretch time, where moving faster can change how quickly moments pass, and where the idea of travelling through time becomes something more than imagination. For now, though, you can rest with this quiet shift. That now is not a single, universal instant. It is something local, something shaped by perspective, something that belongs softly to each observer. And within that realization, time becomes a little less rigid and a little more open. As the idea of a shared now begins to fade, something else quietly takes its place. A new question, simple at first, but deeper than it seems. If time is not the same everywhere, if different observers can disagree about when things happen, then what happens when you begin to move? Not just a little, but steadily, smoothly, through space. Does time remain the same for you? Or does it change ever so slightly as you go? To explore this, it helps to return to something we've already touched on: light. That quiet messenger, always travelling at the same steady pace, no matter who observes it or how they move. This constancy, this unwavering behaviour of light, is one of the most important discoveries in physics. It tells us that, unlike many other things, light does not adjust its speed depending on your motion. Whether you're standing still or moving very quickly, light moves in the same way. And this creates a kind of tension. Because if light behaves the same for everyone, then something else must adjust to make that possible. And what adjusts is time. One of the simplest ways to gently feel this idea is through a small thought experiment. Imagine a quiet device, simple, almost minimal, 2 mirrors facing each other, and between them a tiny beam of light bouncing back and forth. Each time the light travels from one mirror to the other and returns, we can imagine it marking a single tick of a clock. Back and forth, back and forth, a steady rhythm. Now imagine that this light clock is resting beside you. From your perspective, the light moves straight up and down between the mirrors, covering the same distance each time. Each tick takes the same amount of time. The rhythm is steady, predictable. But now imagine that this clock begins to move, not slowly but quickly, gliding across space. From your perspective, watching it move, the light inside the clock no longer travels straight up and down. Instead, it follows a longer angled path, like a gentle zigzag. While the clock moves forward, the light must also move sideways to keep bouncing between the mirrors. The path becomes longer, and because the light continues to travel at the same steady pace, it takes more time to complete each tick. The clock slows down, not because anything inside it has changed, but because it is moving. This is the essence of what is called time dilation. Again, the name is less important than the feeling of it. When something moves very quickly, time, measured by that moving system, passes more slowly compared to something at rest. This is not an illusion. It is not a trick of perception. It is something that has been observed, measured, and confirmed. Particles known as muons, created high in the atmosphere, travel toward the Earth at speeds close to that of light. Under normal conditions, they would decay very quickly, disappearing before they could reach the surface. But because they are moving so fast, their internal clocks run more slowly. From our perspective, they live longer, long enough to reach the ground. And in orbit, astronauts experience something similar, though far more gently. As they move around the Earth at high speeds, time for them passes just a little more slowly than it does for those on the surface. The difference is tiny, far too small to notice directly, but it is real, and it can be measured with precise instruments. 2 paths, 2 motions, 2 slightly different experiences of time. And so, quietly, the idea begins to take shape. Time is not fixed. It is not the same for everyone. It depends on how you move. The faster you travel, the more time stretches, gently, almost imperceptibly at first, but increasingly so as speed approaches that of light. You might imagine it like walking through a soft landscape. At a slow pace, everything feels steady. Each step takes you forward in a familiar rhythm, but as your speed increases, something subtle shifts. The spacing between moments begins to stretch, like footsteps spreading farther apart across the same ground. The path is the same, but your experience of it changes, and this brings us a little closer to the idea of time travel, because if moving faster allows you to experience time differently, if your clock can run more slowly compared to others, then in a very real sense, you are moving into the future. Not by jumping ahead suddenly, but by experiencing less time than those who remain at rest. You age more slowly, you arrive later, and when you return, the world around you has moved forward slightly more than you have. It is a small effect at everyday speeds, but in principle it is the beginning of something remarkable. A form of time travel that does not require machines or paradoxes or impossible technologies. Only motion, only the quiet, steady relationship between speed and time. And yet, even as this idea settles, it remains gentle. There's no need to imagine extreme journeys or distant futures just yet. It is enough to recognize that time, which once seemed so steady, so uniform, has begun to loosen. It stretches, it adapts, it responds to motion. And in doing so, it reveals that the flow of time is not something separate from the universe, but something woven into how the universe moves. As the idea of moving clocks running more slowly begins to settle, it helps to bring it a little closer to something human, something we can follow not just as a concept, but as a story. Imagine two people. They begin in the same place, at the same time. Perhaps they stand together beneath a quiet sky, sharing a moment that feels perfectly ordinary. They are the same age. Their lives, until now, have unfolded in step with one another. Two paths side by side. But then, something changes. One of them prepares to leave, not for a short trip, not for a familiar journey, but for something far more distant. A voyage through space, moving at incredible speed, far beyond anything we experience in daily life. The kind of motion where the quiet stretching of time, which we explored before, begins to grow more noticeable. The other remains behind, grounded, still, living their life here on Earth, where time feels steady, familiar, unchanged. At the moment of departure, nothing seems different. They say goodbye, and for each of them, time continues to pass, second by second, heartbeat by heartbeat, just as it always has. From their own perspective, nothing feels unusual. The traveller does not feel time slowing down. The one who stays does not feel time speeding up. Each experiences their own life in a smooth, continuous way. But beneath that smoothness, something subtle is unfolding. Because the traveller is moving, and as we have seen, motion gently stretches time, not in a way that can be felt directly, but in a way that accumulates, slowly, quietly, moment by moment. As the traveller moves through space at great speed, their internal clock, the rhythm of their body, their thoughts, their aging, runs just a little more slowly compared to the one who remains on Earth. Days pass for both of them, but not quite equally. The difference is tiny at first, almost nothing, but over a long journey it grows, and then, eventually, the traveller returns. They come back to the same place where they began, the same world, the same familiar surroundings, perhaps even the same quiet stretch of ground where they once stood together. But something has changed. The one who stayed behind has aged more. Their life has moved forward more quickly. The traveller, having experienced less time during their journey, has aged less. They are now younger than their twin, not in appearance alone, but in the actual passage of time within their bodies. This is not a paradox in the sense of something impossible. It is a consequence, a natural result of how time responds to motion. Each twin followed a different path through the universe. One remained relatively still, the other moved at great speed, tracing a longer, more complex journey through space. And because of that, their experiences of time diverged. You might think of it like two travellers walking through a landscape. One takes a direct path, steady and unchanging. The other takes a winding route, moving quickly, covering more ground in a different way. When they return to the same meeting point, the distance they have travelled and the time they have experienced are not the same. Not because time itself has broken, but because it is not independent of the path you take. This idea can feel surprising, even a little unsettling at first. We're used to thinking of time as something shared, something that moves forward equally for everyone, like a universal rhythm. But this story, simple, human, and quiet, reveals that this is not quite true. Time is personal. Not in the sense of being arbitrary or unpredictable, but in the sense that it depends on your journey, on how you move, on the path you follow through the fabric of the universe. And in this way, the traveller has done something remarkable. They have moved into the future, not by skipping ahead suddenly, not by leaping across moments, but by experiencing less time than those who remained behind. When they return, the world has advanced further than they have. This is a real form of time travel, forward, not backward, gentle, not dramatic, and grounded entirely in the way time behaves. It does not require machines or paradoxes, only motion, only the quiet stretching of time along different paths. And yet, even as this idea settles, it remains calm, because the speeds required to make this effect large are far beyond everyday experience. In ordinary life, the differences are so small that they pass unnoticed. Time still feels steady, shared, continuous. But now, beneath that feeling, there is a deeper understanding. That time is not a single thread connecting everyone in the same way. It is more like a collection of paths, each one unfolding according to its own conditions, and as we continue, this idea will deepen further. Because motion is only one way that time can change. There's another influence just as powerful, perhaps even more so. Gravity, the quiet pull that shapes the movement of planets, stars and galaxies, and, as we will soon discover, shapes time itself. As the quiet stretching of time through motion begins to settle into place, another influence slowly comes into view. Not movement this time, but gravity, something you feel every day, so familiar that it almost disappears into the background. The gentle pull that keeps your feet on the ground, the force that guides falling rain, drifting leaves, and the steady orbit of the moon around the Earth. It feels constant, reliable, almost simple. But beneath that familiarity, gravity is doing something far more subtle. It is shaping time itself. To begin to feel this, it helps to soften the way we think about gravity. Rather than imagining it as a force pulling objects together, picture it as a gentle curvature, a bending of the very structure in which everything exists. Not just space, but space and time together, woven into a single fabric. You might imagine placing a heavy object onto a stretched surface. The surface dips slightly under the weight. Smaller objects nearby begin to move toward it, not because they are being pulled directly, but because the surface they move across has changed shape. This image is not perfect, but it offers a quiet way to sense what is happening. Mass changes the geometry of the world around it, and time, woven into that geometry, follows the same gentle curves. Now imagine two clocks. One rests high on a mountain, the other sits at sea level, closer to the centre of the Earth. Both are identical, both are precise, both measure time in exactly the same way under normal conditions. But here, the conditions are not quite the same. The clock closer to the Earth is deeper within the pull of gravity. The curvature is slightly stronger, the fabric is more gently bent. And in that deeper region, time moves just a little more slowly. The clock ticks more slowly. Not enough to notice with your senses, but enough to measure with instruments of great precision. The clock on the mountain, slightly farther from the pull, runs just a little faster. Two clocks, two locations, two slightly different experiences of time. This is not theoretical. It has been measured again and again. Even small differences in height, just a few meters, can produce measurable differences in how time passes. Gravity, quiet and constant, is shaping the flow of time everywhere. You might imagine it like walking through a landscape where the ground subtly changes under your feet. In some places your steps feel light, easy, quick. In others, they feel heavier, slower, as if the ground itself is gently resisting. You're still moving. But the pace of your movement shifts depending on where you are. In a similar way, time flows differently, depending on how deep you are within gravity's influence. And as with motion, the effect grows stronger under more extreme conditions. On the surface of the Earth, the difference is tiny, barely noticeable. But as gravity becomes stronger, the slowing of time becomes more pronounced. Near extremely dense objects such as neutron stars or black holes, this effect deepens dramatically. Time, from the perspective of a distant observer, begins to stretch. Moments lengthen, processes slow, and near the edge of a black hole, this stretching becomes so intense that it creates one of the most striking images in all of physics. From far away, an object falling toward a black hole appears to slow down. More and more. Its motion becomes gradual, almost frozen. Light from it takes longer and longer to reach the observer, stretched, dimmed, fading slowly. It never quite seems to cross the boundary. It lingers, suspended in time, and yet from the perspective of the object itself, something very different is happening. It continues forward, smoothly, uninterrupted. Its own sense of time feels normal, steady, unchanged. This contrast between what is seen from afar and what is experienced within reveals something deeply important. Time is not only affected by motion, it is also shaped by gravity. And these effects are not separate. They are part of the same deeper structure. A universe where time is not fixed, not universal, not the same everywhere, but responsive, sensitive, gently moulded by the presence of mass and the movement of objects. And this brings us closer to a more complete picture. Time is not a rigid framework within which events unfold. It is part of the unfolding itself. It stretches and bends along with the fabric of the universe, and in doing so it creates differences, small at first, then more pronounced, between different observers, different locations, different paths. You, standing here on the surface of the Earth, experience time in one way. Someone high above, in orbit, experiences it slightly differently. And near something far more massive, far more dense, the experience would shift even further. Each perspective is valid, each is real, but they are not identical, and so, once again, the idea of a single, shared time begins to dissolve, replaced by something more fluid, more relational, more deeply connected to the structure of the universe itself. And as we move gently forward, this idea will deepen further, because at the most extreme edges of gravity, where space bends most strongly and time stretches most dramatically, we encounter something that challenges not just our understanding of time, but the limits of physics itself. For now, though, it is enough to feel this quiet shift, that gravity does not simply guide motion, it shapes time, and in its presence time does not flow evenly, it slows, softly, steadily, and sometimes almost to a standstill. As gravity deepens and as time begins to stretch more noticeably, there comes a point where our familiar understanding starts to feel less certain, a place where the effects of gravity are no longer subtle, where they become extreme. This place is often described as the edge of a black hole, not a physical surface you could touch, not a solid boundary, but something more delicate, a threshold, a point beyond which nothing, not even light, can return. It is sometimes imagined as a kind of border, a quiet line drawn in the fabric of the universe. And near this boundary, time behaves in a way that feels almost unreal. To explore this, it helps to imagine two perspectives, one far away and one falling inward. From a distance, watching safely from afar, you would see something remarkable. An object, perhaps a spacecraft, or even a person moving toward the black hole. At first the motion seems ordinary. It approaches steadily, guided by gravity, drawing closer and closer to that invisible boundary. But as it nears the edge, something begins to change. Its motion slows, not because it is resisting, not because it is losing energy, but because time itself for that object is stretching relative to you. Each movement takes longer to unfold, each moment lingers. From your perspective, the object appears to slow more and more, as if caught in a gentle, invisible resistance. Its light becomes dimmer, stretched into longer wavelengths, fading slowly into darkness. And as it approaches the boundary, this slowing becomes so extreme that it seems to almost stop, frozen, suspended just at the edge. You never quite see it cross. It simply lingers there, quieter and fainter with time until it disappears from view. From far away, it looks as though time itself has come to a halt. But now gently shift your perspective. Imagine that you are not the distant observer. Imagine that you are the one falling. From your point of view, nothing unusual happens at first. There is no sudden barrier, no sharp line in space, no moment where time feels as though it has stopped. Your experience continues smoothly, just as it always has. Your thoughts flow, your heartbeat remains steady, your sense of time feels unchanged. You move forward, you cross the boundary, and you do so without noticing anything abrupt. To you, time has not frozen, it has continued. And this creates one of the most profound insights in all of physics. Both perspectives are valid. From the outside, time appears to slow, almost stopping at the edge. From the inside, time continues as usual. Two different observers, two different experiences, two different descriptions of the same event, and neither is more correct than the other. They are simply shaped by position, by motion, by the paths each observer takes through the universe. You might think of it like watching someone walk into the distance. From where you stand, their movements appear to slow. Their figure becomes smaller, less distinct, gradually fading from view. Eventually they disappear entirely, but from their own perspective, nothing has changed. They continue walking at the same pace, step by step, moving forward as they always have. The difference lies not in what is happening, but in how it is observed. In the case of a black hole, this difference becomes far more extreme. Time itself becomes part of the separation. From one perspective, it stretches and slows. From another, it flows normally. And so, once again, the idea of a single, shared timeline begins to soften. There is not one universal story unfolding in the same way for everyone. There are multiple, equally valid ways of slicing that story into moments. Multiple timelines, not in the sense of separate universes, but in the sense of different experiences of time, depending on where you are and how you move. This does not mean that reality is fragmented or inconsistent. The underlying structure remains coherent. Events are still connected. Causes still lead to effects. But the way those events are experienced, the rhythm, the pacing, the sense of duration, can differ dramatically. And near a black hole, that difference becomes impossible to ignore. Time, which once felt steady and shared, now reveals itself as something more flexible, something that can stretch to extremes, something that can almost come to a standstill, at least from certain perspectives. And yet, even here, there is a quiet continuity. For the one falling, time does not break, it does not shatter or vanish, it continues, carrying them forward, moment by moment, deeper into a region where our understanding begins to reach its limits. Because beyond that edge, beyond the boundary where light cannot return, there lies something even more difficult to grasp. A place where the usual roles of space and time begin to shift, where direction itself becomes something unfamiliar, and where the idea of moving forward takes on an entirely new meaning. For now, though, it is enough to rest with this gentle contrast, that the same event can unfold in different ways depending on how it is observed. That time can slow, almost to stillness from one perspective, and yet continue smoothly from another. And in that contrast, time becomes less like a single universal flow and more like a quiet, adaptable fabric shaped by the paths we take through it. As you move past the edge of a black hole, at least in imagination, gently and without urgency, something begins to change in a way that is difficult to picture, but possible to feel. Outside, as we have seen, time stretches. From a distance, everything appears to slow almost to stillness. But inside, the structure of reality itself begins to shift. Not violently, not suddenly, but in a way that quietly rearranges what it means to move forward. In your everyday experience, space and time feel like two different things. Space is where you can choose a direction. You can move left or right, forward or backward, up or down. At any moment you have options, paths you can take or choose not to take. Time, however, feels different. You do not choose to move through time. You simply do. One moment follows another, steadily, without pause or reversal. You move from what has already happened toward what has not yet occurred. There is no turning around, no stepping sideways, no lingering indefinitely. Time carries you forward. Now imagine that this familiar distinction begins to soften. As you move deeper into the region within a black hole, the roles of space and time begin to shift. Not in a way that you would feel as a sudden change, but in the underlying structure of how movement is possible. In the world outside, you can choose your direction in space, but not in time. Inside, that freedom in space begins to narrow. The number of directions you can take begins to shrink, and one direction, one inevitable direction, begins to dominate. Not as a force pulling you, but as a path you are already on, a path that leads inward, toward what is often called the centre, though even that word can be misleading. It is not a place in the usual sense. It is something more like a future, an event that lies ahead of you, the way tomorrow lies ahead in your everyday life. You do not move toward it because you are being pulled in the usual sense. You move toward it because it is what comes next. Just as you cannot choose to stop time from moving forward in your daily experience, you cannot choose to avoid this direction once you are inside. It is not one option among many. It is the only path that remains. And this is where the idea becomes both subtle and powerful. Inside this region, what we normally think of as space begins to behave more like time, and what we think of as time becomes the path you follow, inevitably step by step. You might imagine it like walking along a narrow corridor. At the beginning, there are many open spaces. You can move freely, choose your direction, wander as you wish. But as you move forward, the space around you narrows, the walls draw closer, the path becomes more defined. Eventually, there is only one way to go, forward. Not because something is pushing you, but because there is nowhere else to move. This is not a perfect image, but it captures something essential. That inside this extreme region, the freedom you associate with space gives way to the inevitability you associate with time. And the singularity, the place often described as the centre of the black hole, is not something you approach like a destination on a map. It is something you approach the way you approach the next moment, unavoidably, naturally, as part of the flow of time itself. This can feel unsettling if we try to picture it too sharply, but it can also be understood in a softer way. You're always moving forward in time, always. There is no pause, no reversal, no escape from that progression. Inside this region, that same sense of inevitability applies not just to time, but to direction itself. Forward is no longer just when, it becomes where. And in this way, the boundary between space and time begins to blur. They are no longer separate categories. They are aspects of a deeper structure, one that reveals itself most clearly under extreme conditions, And this brings us to an important realization. What we experience in everyday life, clear directions in space, a steady flow of time, is not the full story. It is a local version, a gentle approximation that works well under familiar conditions. But when gravity becomes intense, when the structure of the universe bends more strongly, those familiar distinctions begin to change. Space and time reveal themselves as part of the same fabric, flexible, interconnected, capable of shifting in ways that feel almost impossible to imagine, yet follow consistent underlying principles. And still, even here, there is a kind of continuity. You do not feel time breaking. You do not experience a sudden collapse of reality. You move forward, moment by moment, as you always have. Your experience remains smooth. It is the structure beneath that has changed. And this is where our journey reaches a quiet boundary. Because beyond this point, at the singularity itself, our current understanding no longer provides clear answers. The mathematics that describe the universe begin to lose their meaning. Quantities grow without bound. Predictions become uncertain. It is not that something dramatic happens in the way we might imagine. It is that our descriptions can no longer follow. And so, gently, we arrive at a place where physics itself begins to fall silent. Not because there is nothing there, but because we do not yet know how to describe it. For now, you can simply rest with this idea, that in the most extreme environments, time does not behave as it does here. It becomes part of the path you follow, a quiet, inevitable direction. And in that direction, you are always moving forward, not just through time, but with it. As we follow this path inward, through motion, through gravity, and into the deep structure of space and time, we eventually arrive at a place where something unexpected happens, not an explosion, not a dramatic event, but a quiet boundary, a point where our understanding begins to fade. Up to now, everything we have explored has followed a kind of gentle logic. Time stretches with motion. It slows under gravity. Near extreme objects, it bends in ways that feel unfamiliar but still consistent. Each idea, though surprising, connects smoothly to the next. But at the very center of a black hole, at what is often called the singularity, that smoothness begins to break, not in reality itself, but in our ability to describe it. When physicists attempt to model this region using the equations that describe gravity, something unusual appears. Certain quantities, measures of density, curvature, and energy, grow without limit. They do not settle into stable values. They do not approach something finite. They simply continue to increase beyond any boundary. This is not a physical observation in the usual sense. It is a signal, a quiet indication that the tools we're using, the theories we rely on, have reached their limits. It is as if you were trying to map a landscape, drawing careful lines and shapes, only to reach a region where your map can no longer capture what is there. The terrain becomes too complex, too extreme, too different from anything you have encountered before. The map does not tell you what exists in that region. It tells you that you do not yet know how to describe it. And this is what the singularity represents. Not necessarily a place where the universe breaks, but a place where our current understanding is incomplete. For much of the universe, two great frameworks guide our understanding. One describes the large scale, the motion of planets, the bending of light, the structure of space and time under gravity. This is the theory that has carried us through everything we've explored so far. The other describes the very small, the behavior of particles, the subtle fluctuations of energy, the quiet uncertainty that lives at the smallest scales. Each of these frameworks works beautifully within its own domain, but at the singularity they are both needed at once. Gravity becomes extremely strong, and scales become incredibly small. The two frameworks overlap, and in that overlap they do not yet fit together. It is not that they contradict each other in a simple way. It is that they speak different languages, each describing reality with its own set of rules, its own way of organizing the world. And at the singularity, we need a deeper language, one that can bring these descriptions together into a single coherent picture. This is what physicists sometimes refer to, softly, as a theory of quantum gravity. Not a complete answer, not something fully understood, but a direction. A recognition that our current view is not final, that there is more to learn, more to discover, and this realization carries with it a quiet kind of humility, because it reminds us that even our most successful theories have boundaries. They guide us, they illuminate much of what we see, but they are not the final word. There are places, rare, extreme and distant, where our understanding grows quiet, and in that quiet, questions remain. What happens at the centre of a black hole? What is the true nature of space and time under such conditions? Do the concepts we rely on, distance, duration, direction, continue to hold their meaning? Or do they give way to something deeper, something not yet fully imagined? These are not questions with clear answers, not yet. And that is part of what makes them so compelling. Not because they promise something dramatic or mysterious, but because they reveal the edges of what we know. They show us where our journey of understanding continues, and this, in its own way, connects back to our exploration of time. Because as we move through these ideas, time itself has become less certain, less fixed, more responsive to motion, to gravity, to perspective. And now, at this boundary, even the frameworks we use to describe time begin to reach their limits, not breaking entirely, but becoming incomplete. And so we pause here, not with a conclusion, but with an opening. A recognition that our understanding of time, deep as it has become, is still evolving, still unfolding, still part of a larger story that we are only beginning to grasp. And from this quiet place, another question begins to emerge, not about how time flows, but about something that seems to lie beneath it: information, the patterns, the structures, the details that make each moment what it is. Because if time can stretch, bend, and even reach the limits of our understanding, what happens to the information carried within it? Does it remain? Does it fade? Or does it follow rules we have not yet fully uncovered? For now, there is no need to answer. It is enough to let the question rest, softly, quietly, at the edge of what we know. As we rest at the edge of what we can describe, where our current understanding begins to soften, another question slowly comes into focus. Not about time itself this time, but about what time carries: information. Every moment you experience is filled with it. The arrangement of objects around you, the sound of a voice, the warmth of light on your skin, even your thoughts, your memories, your sense of self, all are patterns, structured, meaningful, specific. This is what we mean, in a gentle sense, by information. Not just data, not just numbers, but the detailed way things are. And in much of physics there is a quiet expectation. That information is not lost. It can change form, it can spread out, it can become harder to trace, more subtle, more diffuse. But it does not simply vanish. If you break a glass, for example, the shape is destroyed, the familiar form is gone, but the information that once described that glass has not disappeared. It has been redistributed into the positions of tiny fragments, into vibrations, into heat, into the surrounding air. The order has become disorder, but the information is still there, hidden within the new arrangement. Now imagine something more extreme, a black hole, an object so dense, so deeply curved in its structure that anything crossing its boundary can no longer return. Not matter, not light, not even the signals that carry information outward. If something falls into a black hole, a book, a particle, a memory encoded in some physical form, what happens to the information it contains? From the outside, it appears to disappear. The object fades from view as it approaches the boundary, its light stretching and dimming until it vanishes entirely. No signal escapes. No detail returns. It is as though the information has been erased. But this creates a quiet tension, because the laws that describe the smallest scales of the universe, the ones that govern particles and their interactions, suggest that information should not be lost in this way. It should remain in some form, preserved even if hidden, and so we are left with a puzzle. On one side, gravity suggests that information can fall into a black hole and disappear from the observable universe. On the other, the deeper rules of physics suggest that information must be conserved. Both ideas are well supported. Both are deeply woven into our understanding. And yet, here, they seem to pull in different directions. This is what is often called the information paradox. Again, the name is less important than the feeling of it. A quiet question. If something falls beyond the boundary of a black hole, is its information truly gone? Or is it still there in some form we do not yet fully understand? Over time, physicists have explored many possibilities. One idea suggests that information is not lost, but stored in a subtle way on the surface of the black hole itself. Not in a physical layer you could touch, but in a deeper sense, a boundary where the details of everything that has fallen in are somehow encoded, like a vast invisible record. Another idea considers that information might slowly return, not directly, but through the faint radiation that black holes emit over extremely long periods of time, a slow, almost imperceptible release, where the hidden details gradually re-emerge, spread out and transformed. These ideas are still being explored, refined, tested, and while there is growing evidence that information may indeed be preserved, the full picture is not yet complete. What matters for our journey is not the final answer, but the shape of the question, because it reveals something subtle and important, that even when something appears to vanish, there may be more happening beneath the surface, and this connects gently to our exploration of time, because if information is preserved, even as it spreads, even as it becomes difficult to trace, then the past is not truly gone. It is still present in some form woven into the structure of the universe, not accessible in the same way, not easily reconstructed, but not erased. And this leads to a quiet, almost poetic idea, that the universe may, in some deep sense, remember everything. Not in the way a mind remembers, with images and narratives, but in the way a pattern persists, even as it changes. Each moment leaving a trace, each change contributing to the overall structure. Nothing simply disappearing, only transforming. And yet, from your perspective, from within your experience, things do feel as though they are lost. Moments pass, memories fade, objects break, dissolve, disappear. Time seems to carry things away. This difference between what appears to be lost and what may still exist in some deeper form is part of the mystery. A reminder that what we experience is only one layer of reality, a layer shaped by perception, by memory, by the limits of what we can observe. Beneath that layer, the structure may be more continuous, more connected, more complete, and so we arrive once again at a quiet boundary, a place where time, information, and the limits of our understanding meet, not with clear answers, but with a deeper sense of wonder. Because if information cannot truly disappear, And if time itself is not as simple as it once seemed, then the story of the universe may be far richer than our everyday experience suggests. For now, it is enough to let that thought rest, like a distant echo, a quiet possibility, that nothing is ever entirely lost, and that every moment in some subtle way continues to exist. As we come back from the edges of black holes and the limits of our theories, there is a quieter question waiting for us here, closer to home. A question that has been present all along. Why does time seem to move in only one direction? Why do you remember the past, but not the future? Why does a warm cup of tea cool down, but never quietly warm itself back up? Why does a glass, once shattered, remain scattered, instead of gathering itself gently back into form? There is something deeply familiar about this one-way flow, so familiar that it rarely feels like a question at all. And yet, when we look closely, the laws that govern motion, energy, and change do not always insist on a single direction. Many of them work just as well forward as backward. If you were to watch certain processes in reverse, they would still make sense, at least in principle. And yet, in everyday life, we never see time reverse. We never see effects come before causes. We never see order spontaneously reassemble from disorder. Instead, we see a quiet pattern. Things move from ordered states to more spread out ones, from structure to dispersion, from clarity to complexity. This tendency is often described with a single word, entropy. But rather than thinking of it as a technical term, you can feel it in simple, familiar ways. Imagine a neatly arranged room. Everything is in its place. Objects are aligned, surfaces are clear, patterns are simple. Now imagine living in that room, moving through it, using it, interacting with it. Over time, things begin to shift. A book left slightly out of place, a chair moved, a cup set down and forgotten, dust settling quietly in the corners. The room becomes less ordered, not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually. Because there are many more ways for things to be slightly disordered than perfectly arranged. This is the essence of entropy. Not chaos in a dramatic sense, but a quiet tendency for systems to move towards states that are more spread out, more varied, less tightly structured. And this tendency gives rise to what we experience as the direction of time. You remember the past because it was more ordered, because it left traces, clearer, more defined arrangements that could be recorded in memory, in physical structures, in the patterns of the world around you. The future, by contrast, has not yet formed those traces. It remains open, unwritten, and so your memory points backward, not forward. Your experience follows the direction in which information about events becomes available. And this connects gently to something we explored earlier, the cooling of tea. At first, the tea is warm, its heat concentrated. The energy is held in a specific organized way. But over time, that energy spreads into the surrounding air, dispersing, becoming less concentrated. The process is easy, natural, because there are many ways for the energy to spread out. But the reverse, heat gathering itself from the air, returning to the tea, restoring its warmth without any external input, would require a highly specific arrangement. An unlikely convergence of countless small interactions, not impossible in principle, but so extraordinarily improbable that it effectively never happens. And so, in practice, we only see one direction, from concentrated to dispersed, from ordered to less ordered, and we call that direction forward. This is what gives time its arrow, not a physical arrow pointing through the universe, but a pattern in how change unfolds, a pattern rooted in probability, in the simple fact that some arrangements are vastly more likely than others. And this idea extends far beyond tea and rooms. It applies to stars burning their fuel, to galaxies evolving, to the gradual fading of structure over immense stretches of time. It even touches your own experience. Memories form because information about the past becomes embedded in physical systems. Your brain, your surroundings. The future has no such record yet, and so your awareness follows the trail of increasing entropy. Forward, always forward. This does not mean that time itself is pushing you in a particular direction. Rather, it means that the processes you observe and the way your mind records them naturally align with this unfolding. Time feels like it flows because change has a preferred direction, and that direction is toward greater spread, greater complexity, greater distribution of energy and information. And yet, even here, there is something gentle, because this movement is not chaotic in the way we might imagine. It is not a sudden collapse into disorder. It is a gradual unfolding process, a quiet drifting, a slow reshaping of patterns over time. And within that process there is still structure, still beauty, still meaning. The night sky remains filled with stars, even as those stars slowly evolve. Your thoughts continue to form, even as each moment passes into memory. Life unfolds, not in spite of this direction, but within it. And so, as we come to understand why time appears to move forward, we also begin to see something deeper. That this direction is not imposed from outside. It emerges from within the way the universe changes, from the way energy spreads, from the way information becomes embedded in the world, and from the way your mind traces that unfolding. And with that, we arrive at a quiet clarity. Time does not need to flow backward for the universe to be complete. The forward direction, the one you experience moment by moment, is not a limitation. It is a reflection of how things naturally evolve, and within that evolution, you're already moving through time, not resisting it, not escaping it, but participating in it, one moment at a time. And so, as our journey begins to slow, we return quietly to the question that has been resting with us from the very beginning. Could time travelers be living among us? It's a question that often arrives with vivid images, machines humming softly in hidden rooms, people stepping out of moments that do not belong to them, visitors from distant futures blending seamlessly into the present. But as we've seen, the reality suggested by science is both gentler and more subtle. Time, as it turns out, is not a simple path that can be stepped off and re-entered at will. It is something far more, woven into the structure of the universe. It stretches with motion. It bends under gravity. It depends on perspective. It is shaped by the flow of energy, by the spread of information, by the quiet unfolding of change. And within all of this, one form of time travel does exist. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but real. When you move quickly, faster than those around you, time for you passes a little more slowly. When you return, even if only by a tiny amount, you've moved slightly further into the future than those who remained behind. This is not speculation. It has been measured, observed, confirmed. Astronauts moving through orbit age just a fraction less than those on Earth. Particles travelling at high speeds persist longer than they otherwise would. The effect is small in everyday life, but it is real. And in principle, if the speeds were great enough, the journey long enough, the difference could become significant. You could travel forward in time, not by leaping ahead, but by experiencing less of it. And so, in this quiet sense, time travel is already part of reality, but only in one direction, forward. The idea of travelling backward in time, of returning to the past, of revisiting moments that have already unfolded, is far more uncertain. There are mathematical models that allow for such possibilities. Certain solutions to the equations that describe gravity suggest that, under very specific and extreme conditions, paths might exist that loop back on themselves. These ideas often involve structures like wormholes, bridges between distant regions of space and time. But these remain, for now, theoretical. They require conditions that we do not know how to create, forms of energy that have not been observed in the necessary way, stability that may not be possible in practice. And even if such paths could exist, they raise deep questions. What happens to cause and effect? Can an event influence its own origin? Do contradictions arise? These are not simple problems, and as of now, there is no experimental evidence that backward time travel is possible, no confirmed observation, no verified case. And so, when we return to the question, could someone from the future be here, quietly living among us? The scientific answer remains grounded. There is no evidence to support it, no signal, no observation, no trace that suggests such travellers are present. The stories, while imaginative and compelling, remain within the realm of fiction. And yet, this does not make the journey we have taken any less meaningful. Because along the way, something has shifted. Time, which may once have felt simple and absolute, has revealed itself to be more flexible, more relational, more deeply connected to the structure of the universe than it first appeared. It is not a single, universal stream. It is a collection of experiences, a fabric shaped by motion, by gravity, by perspective, a quiet unfolding that carries each of us forward along our own path. And within that unfolding there is something worth noticing. You're already a traveller, not in the dramatic sense, not moving between distant eras or hidden timelines, but in the simplest and most profound way. You're moving forward, always, each moment giving way to the next, each experience becoming part of what has been, even as it shapes what is to come. You do not step outside of time, you move with it. And in that movement, there is a kind of continuity, a gentle flow that connects your past, your present, and your future into a single, unfolding story. You carry your memories with you. You imagine what lies ahead. You exist within the quiet span of the present. And together, these create your sense of time, not as something external and fixed, but as something lived, something experienced, something that is always, quietly becoming. And so, perhaps the question we began with changes just a little. Not, are there time travellers among us, but something softer. What does it mean to move through time at all? To exist within a universe where time can stretch, bend, and differ from one path to another, and yet still feel so continuous, so familiar, so close. There is no need to answer that fully. It is enough to let the idea rest, to feel the quiet rhythm of moments passing, to notice the gentle unfolding of change, and to recognize that time is not something distant or abstract. It is here, in the breath you are taking, in the thought that is forming, in the slow, steady movement from one moment to the next. And in that movement, you're already part of the story. A traveller, not between distant eras, but along the only path time truly offers. Forward, softly, moment by moment. And so we've reached the end of tonight's exploration. Whether your eyes are still open or you're already floating somewhere between waking and dreaming, thank you for being part of this little journey. If you'd like to join me again for more gentle wanderings, you're always welcome to subscribe or share this with someone who could use a peaceful pause. Time has a way of slipping through our fingers, but here, in this quiet moment, it's just you and the soft hush of rest. Sleep peacefully wherever and whenever you may be.